This is Tales from the Grit, hosted by TPS students. We talk with people from all walks of life to better understand our now and realize our next. Let's get started. We're here today with Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, representative of Washington State's 10th District, along with Patrick Irwin, Director of Educator Pathways and Global Education for Tacoma Public Schools, discussing how resiliency, servant leadership, and social equity break down barriers, not just here in Tacoma, but all over the world.
I think you're missing something. This is the first time we've interviewed a married couple. I mean, that's pretty new.
You both lived here in Tacoma for a long time. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, you even went to school here growing up. One of the things I love most about Tacoma is the people and their stories. What's your story? How did a little girl from Edison Elementary grow up to be a member of Congress?
So first of all, you can call me Marilyn instead of Congresswoman Strickland, so this is conversational. And I'm often asked that question. So I proudly grew up in South Tacoma, and I proudly call it the 98409, or the 409 for short. And I went to Edison Elementary, Gray Middle School, and Mount Tahoma High School. And I think the story here is any person from any neighborhood with any background can end up wherever they want. And it's hard work. It's doing well in school. But it's also making sure you have the relationships to help you be successful. And the reason that I was ever mayor of Tacoma and now a member of Congress is because my guidance counselor in middle school at Gray Junior High, Brian Ebersol, was my mentor. He was Speaker of the House, he was mayor of Tacoma, and I ran into him and he said, "You should run for office one day."
I don't know. I feel like I need to say something about that.
What do you want to say?
I mean, that was just inspiring. Just the fact that from even now, even if it's middle school or now, that, you know, someone that had such a role, they can tell you that you're more than what you think you are, and that can lead to this. I mean, it just makes you acknowledge like what words really do mean and how much they have an impact.
Yeah, and it means that if you have a vision for something, or even if you don't, because this is important. I wasn't in high school or the University of Washington saying, I want to be in politics one day, but the opportunity presented itself and I was ready.
And what about you, Pat? You've dedicated your life to make sure marginalized and unserved communities are seen. What part of your origin story led you to do this work?
When I was in high school, so first off, being an adolescent male, I was pretty oblivious to many things. But when I was in high school, we had a graduation requirement where we had to do community service. And I put my name in. I didn't really request anything that I recall. And I could have been assigned to a nursing home where I could read stories to people there and visit with folks. But I was assigned to Bryant Elementary School. It's now Bryant Montessori, but it was Bryant Elementary School at the time. And I was tutoring 3rd through 6th grade students. So I walked in thinking they're going to be able to read, do basic math, and I'm going to work with them and it'll be great. And I found students who really couldn't read at all. And to me, I thought, everyone can read. That's just my world. That was the bubble I grew up in. And as a result, that really changed the way I thought about my responsibility to the community. And there's a quote that I often cite, but there's a famous Jewish sage named Hillel, and they have a line which says, "If I'm for myself alone, what good am I?" And I'm very much a community person. Life is a team sport. We don't get through it by ourselves. So I decided to become a teacher. Not at that moment in time, but once I went through college and I was trying to weigh my options, I decided that teaching was the place for me.
Yeah, so let's talk about the bubble for a second, because our life experiences as children were very different from each other. And, you know, I was born in Korea. My mother is an immigrant. My father served in the military, and neither of them what you would call educated. But literacy and reading were so important to them. So they were teaching me the alphabet when I was a little girl. When by the time I got to kindergarten at Edison, I was already reading. And to them, if I knew how to read, everything else would come along easier. And my dad used to say, you can't figure out the math problem or the science problem if you can't read the question they're asking you. And so reading and literacy and love of books was so important in my household. And I often credit that to my ability to navigate this world and to be where I am today.
Well, I think when it comes to the bubble, I guess when I think of that, is we all occupy bubbles and we may not realize that we're in a bubble. And when I went to Bryant, that shattered my bubble. And it wasn't that I didn't know Tacoma. I mean, I was a long distance runner, so we ran all over the city and I had friends in every neighborhood. But I was just, my whole peer group was really pretty good at school. So I just assumed that everyone else was. And when I found some people who were not good at school, that to me was troubling. But I think that's one of the things that I also see as my responsibility as an educator, is to help students realize that the bubble that they are currently in can get much larger and the opportunities can grow. So in Marilyn's case, to have the guidance counselor who then became mayor, and then to meet her again and say, why don't you, wasn't it the library board that he invited you to join?
He invited me to join the library board.
And that started her political career. So her bubble included somebody who was able to help break out of that bubble that she grew up in.
Yeah, but before then, my bubble was pretty much South Tacoma and the people I grew up with. And here's something really interesting. When the people I grew up with, a lot of them, I went from kindergarten through 12th grade together as a cohort. And that's not as common anymore as it used to be. So a lot of people that I knew in middle school, I knew when I was in elementary school. A lot of people I knew in high school, I knew since I was in kindergarten. I think that sense of community and anchoring is so important for so many kids.
Absolutely.
So Marilyn, I read your bio and it said that you lived in Atlanta. What were you doing there?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's a girl from Tacoma, Washington doing in Atlanta? So there's a sad part of the story. So my dad passed away when I was in my 20s. And I met a lot of my cousins who were from Georgia because my father was from Noonan, Georgia. So they came up here and I was flying back and forth to visit Atlanta. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to move down there. So I quit my job, packed up my car, and drove cross country by myself. This is in the pre-cell phone world, by the way. This was like a giant Rand McNally map with a highlighter, trying to drive X number of hours per day. And I went down there. And what was cool was that I didn't go down there to go to graduate school because I graduated from the University of Washington up here. But I discovered the Historically Black Colleges and University System, which is HBCUs. So I'm a graduate of Clark Atlanta University. And going to a historically Black college was just life-changing for me because, number one, I was in a university setting, but for the first time, I was not a minority. And I think sometimes we take that for granted when kids of color are in, majority-serving universities. And it was just a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And we just had such a good time talking about topics that didn't typically come up in other classrooms when I was at University of Washington. And so that's how I ended up in Atlanta. I was there for 5 years. I was there for a few years working, decided to go to graduate school at Clark Atlanta University, and then I came back home and started working for this little unknown coffee company called Starbucks.
How else do you think living at Atlanta just helps you develop as a person?
I would say a few things. I mean, I drove there by myself, and I had cousins there, so I did have some family there. But number one, the experience of driving cross country by yourself, which I don't recommend for a young woman in her 20s these days. But, sometimes when you're young, you're just kind of more adventurous than you should be.
Right.
But always calling to stop and, and checking with my mom. But I would say the thing about that is that it just reminded you that there's a whole world out there, not just across oceans and in other countries, but even in the United States, because this country we live in is so diverse in its own right. The food is different, the accents are different. And so I just think that it just really opened up the whole idea for me. Like there's a whole world out there that is ready to be explored.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you tell that story because I think one of the things that as an educator I have to realize, and I realized this early on, is I was a teacher at Mount Tacoma. And two stories come to mind. One is I remember the first time that we were taking the track team to South Kitsap. I was a coach on the track team. And we're crossing the Narrows Bridge, and a student says to me, just kind of taps me on the shoulder and very quietly says, "Are we in another state?" And I just said, "No, but I can understand why you think that."
It was like the Golden Gate Bridge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you cross a body of water, it's significant, and there's the land on the other side, and it's another population of people. And I said, "No, it's actually Washington, but I understand why you would think that." And I realized then that the kids at Mount Tacoma really weren't leaving the South End. They were not traveling not only the city, but they weren't going up to Seattle, they weren't going over to Mount Rainier, they weren't going to Eastern Washington, or any other state for that matter. So that was something that really resonated with me, and the idea of we have to show people what's out there, because there's that old saying of you can't be what you can't see. So we have to expose students to that. But I also think that as educators, and I'm a white male of a certain age, is we have to keep in mind that we are there to learn as much as we are to teach. And I remember I'll go back to an HBCU experience I had at Mount Tacoma. So I taught at Mount Tacoma, and then I left to work at the district office. And I came to visit one day, and students ran up to me and they said, "You have to talk to Brandon. You have to talk to Brandon." And I said, "Why?" Former student of mine, they said, "He's got a free ride to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, et cetera, and he's not going to go." So I pulled him out of class. We sat down on a bench, and I said, "Hey, so what's going on?" And he said, "Well, I've got all these offers." I said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to go to Howard University." And I said, "Okay, tell me more." And he said, "I've gone to school with white kids my whole life. I want to go to school with black kids." And, Howard's a very prestigious HBCU in Washington, D.C. And I just said, "Okay, I'm not there to say you're making a mistake. You don't know. You don't understand." He knew more about what he needed than I knew what he needed. And the cool thing was I saw him some years later when I started as principal at Lincoln, and I saw him up at South Center, of all places. And I'm like, well, and he said, I went to Howard, graduated summa cum laude or magna cum laude, I forget. And I said, okay. And he said, and then I went to Harvard Law School, and I graduated summa cum laude. And then he worked for President Obama. So here's a South End kid who, he broke his own bubble. I mean, he knew that I had to get away and have this experience. He was going to break it regardless, but he wanted to go to Howard to have that experience. So we always have to honor the needs and interests of students as well.
And there's another story similar. So our Attorney General for Washington State, Nick Brown, grew up in Steilacoom. He went to Morehouse College, a very prestigious men's school in Atlanta. So he went to an HBCU, and then he went to law school at Harvard. And so again, I think there are great stories here at home that people aren't aware of, but it talks about connections, opportunity, and actually having communities that support you when you want to take a chance and do something.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Marilyn, let's switch gears. When you were mayor of Tacoma, you had this brilliant idea of partnering with the school's district to provide paid work experiences for teens to prepare us for the real world. In fact, this podcast is a Jobs 253 experience. Can you tell us about that?
I can. And as much as I want to take credit for it, I actually got the idea from President Obama. So when you're the mayor of a city, there's a national group called the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I was mayor when Barack Obama was president. So he would invite us to the White House all the time, or he would come to visit us. And he said, I want the mayors in America to come up with a summer jobs program in every one of your cities. But I wanted to go beyond just giving a kid a summer job. We want you to think about professional development, how to write a resume, even financial literacy training. And so I came back from that conference. I was all hyped up and excited. I said, we're going to do a Summer Jobs 253 program. And people said, what? We're going to do what? And I said, they said, well, we don't have time to do it. Let's do it next year. And I said, no, we're doing it now. And we called it a pilot program. I think we had about 20 some odd students in the beginning. The city worked with the school district. And I remember talking to the superintendent at the time, Carla Santorno, and she was very, very receptive about it. But years later, she told me behind her back, she's like, oh, great, what's the mayor thinking about now? But we did it anyway, and it was very successful. And that was back when I was mayor. I mean, I left the mayor's office in 2017. And so it's exciting for me to see that this has become Jobs 253 because it's not just summer work, and that we're here doing a podcast based on that idea. But it was basically Barack Obama challenging the mayors in America to go home and do a summer jobs program, but do something different.
I really love that you said that because personally, my whole family has been affected by the Jobs 253. My brother did it after COVID, and I think after COVID was a very rough time for everyone. And it was really hard for my brother especially to just get social again. And so he did the Jobs 253 program and did so good that he got on the calendar, got to have a video about his experience doing Jobs 253. So I decided to do Jobs 253, and I just think that it was such an amazing thing that you guys did for the community.
So, whenever you launch a program or something, you always hope it'll do well. But every now and again, you get lucky and you create what's called a legacy program. So the fact that I'm sitting here with you now as a member of Congress and we're going back to this program I created when I was mayor is pretty exciting. But here's why I wanted this program to be structured the way it is. So many kids in our community don't have parents who know people and don't have access to open doors that some other kids have. And I wanted to replicate the idea of opportunity and relationships so that the kids in this program would get to know someone. They would be able to put someone on their resume as a reference and forming those relationships. And every time I spoke to classes, I would say, make sure you get to know 3 people at your job so that they will be a reference for you. Do such a good job that they'll be so impressed by you.
Yeah, and that's back to the bubble that we talked about earlier, is it allowed people to expand beyond their bubble to meet these people in a profession that they're interested in and possibly have jobs there.
Yeah, that's great.
And Pat, even as the principal of Lincoln High School, you must have seen the impact of Jobs 253 that had on students. And how does a program like that impact not only students, but the entire community?
Lincoln's a great example because we had always had a robust greenhouse program there, but then the Lincoln plant sale became sort of the be-all and end-all of plant sales in Tacoma. Yep. But Cale Iverson and Ben Dotson were the 2 teachers who really took the ball and ran with it, and they had really robust summer programming, and I think Cale carried most of the heavy lift there. But it was really transformative for our students because not only were they making money, and you can find jobs, but sometimes summer jobs are hard to find. But to be able to find a job and have it be something that you're proud of and you have value in, and then those students became really invested in the program when they came back to school. And actually, many of them ended up in horticulture fields of study when they went on to college because they realized that the phrase at Lincoln is loyal to the soil. and the students really became loyal to the soil. And I will say that I think that we have such a disconnect between how we live our lives and our understanding of the way that nature works, and to have students work with plants and to grow vegetables. Then we started donating vegetables to the community. It was a huge growing opportunity for the school, a growing opportunity for the students.
Pun intended.
But yeah, I mean, it was fantastic and still remains a fantastic opportunity. And one thing I will also say is that when Marilyn was the mayor, she, unlike many mayors, had education as part of her focus. So she was engaging with educators at the district level all the time. It was not an uncommon thing, but instead was part of her understanding of the way cities function, that if we have an educated populace and if we graduate students, the better it is for the entire city. So that's always been a part of her.
I love that you said that because I was just thinking after what you said is that like when you help the community, it's just like a domino effect. So doing Jobs 253 helped my brother and he got to do like coaching jobs, and that helped all these younger students just with like meeting new people, making a team, like that teamwork just helped them like build social cues and stuff like that.
No, and that's really important because, you know, one of the things that I sometimes worry about is the whole idea of social capital. And that's basically the fact that we spend time physically in person together, we get to know each other, we have these conversations, and it expands our circle. And sometimes I worry that because we do so much with our phones and digitally, that we deprive ourselves of building social capital, because that's what keeps communities strong, is social capital. So when we started Summer Jobs 253, and it was very, you know, we didn't give ourselves a lot of runway or time to get it done. And so a lot of it in the beginning was nonprofit organizations and some of the smaller businesses who said, I could use some help, and if you're going to help pay the salaries, even better. And as the program became more successful, you had some of the larger corporate partners now saying, wait a minute, we could actually have someone be part of Summer Jobs 253 as well. And when people are willing to invest in our students, they have a very big interest in making sure that student is successful. And so as we talk about expanding our network, school district, government work, nonprofit work, now private sector work. And I often say this is important, especially in Tacoma, because we don't have the same resources that a place like Seattle or Bellevue has as far as businesses that are there. But we have good businesses down here. And so how do we make sure that people understand that this is an option too, especially in a community that is very dependent on work that is mostly government-oriented, which is fantastic work, by the way. I tell people local government is where it's at. But there's also a private sector out there, and they're seeing that it is valuable to them to invest in these programs as well, because they get a lot out of it. And they get to know some really cool kids. There have been job offers in the private sector as a result of this Jobs 253 program, and they would not have happened had these young people not gone there and made positive impressions on these employers.
And I think you're seeing some connective tissue here in our conversation, and that is, you know, when Marilyn was talking about the social capital, and then we talk about the networking that occurs. And I said earlier that life is a team sport. We don't do this by ourselves, we do it together. And I think it's important to recognize that opportunities like Jobs 253 are kind of a dry run for when you go to a vocational college or to a job site for training or to university and try to break into a certain field. Is you're getting that test drive where you're meeting people, understanding how to navigate systems, how to network with people, and how to use those contacts to leverage for better jobs in the future.
And even something as simple as, you know, having to find transportation to get to work. It's one thing to know your route to school every day, right? You have a routine, but, you know, we had students who were working actually outside of Tacoma one year. And so how are they going to ride the bus? Was they going to ride the 594? How are they going to get there? And so even the whole adult experience of having to look at transportation.
Absolutely.
Positive human impact is something that you both get to experience every single day. I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. Okay. What is one thing personally or professionally that you are most proud of in terms of the impact you've had on this world?
Why don't you start?
Oh, thanks. I've been really lucky. I'll start there. I've worked with some amazing people over the years. And I think collectively we had opportunities, and I'll pick on Lincoln because that's where I was the longest. But I think that we had a run at Lincoln where we took a school that was not what it could be and became a school that was very much one to be proud of for the people who worked there, the students who attended there, and the families whose students went there, and for the alumni as well. And I think that when you get to high school, in education circles, sometimes it's the idea of like we really have to do well in elementary school and then the kids will be fine. But the idea is like when they get to high school, kind of their future's already set, and I disagree with that. And at Lincoln, I think that we were able to change the trajectory of lives for students and by extension their families, and have fun while we did it. So I think that's, to me, it's to have done something at Lincoln that we could point to and say, come on, everyone, we can all be better at what we do when it comes to our kids.
Yeah, so I would say two things, and obviously we're living it right now. We started this summer jobs program as a pilot when I was mayor with 20 students, and now in 2025 it's been expanded so much that it's called Jobs 253. But there's a moment I'm going to talk about that's very personal. So I ran for Congress and I got sworn in during the pandemic. So I called myself a pandemic freshman, a very small class of us. And that meant that during the swearing-in ceremony, which is usually a big week of events with your family and friends, no one could travel because of the pandemic, because of the COVID. So we got sworn in with no family there, no one there to cheer us on, no pictures with the speaker, none of that. And, you know, you're one of 400 some odd people on the floor when you get sworn in. And my mother, who was alive at the time, was watching this on TV, but I wanted her to be able to pick me out of the crowd. So I wore a traditional Korean dress, and it's called hanbok. Look it up, Marilyn Strickland hanbok. You can see it online. And I wore that dress for a few reasons. We were just coming off an administration that was very cruel to Asian Americans, and I wanted to send a message about my culture and my history. I wanted to honor my mother, but what I didn't know was that this was going to go viral. And so it was in international newspapers, it was all over the press in Korea, and to this day, I will travel around the country and I will have Korean Americans come up to me and say to me, I cried when I saw them because I finally felt seen. And so a small gesture of honor about your culture and history resonated with so many people around the world and part of the Korean American diaspora. So I would say that is by far my proudest personal moment.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Whoa. Yeah. I don't even know what to say at that. It's like I don't want to even like skip to the next question.
Well, I'll just jump in for a second. To add to that, a good friend of mine and somebody that Marilyn has met before who worked for me at Lincoln called me after the swearing in, and she was in tears. And she's Korean American, and she just said, I had no idea that I needed to see that. I needed to see someone who looked like me representing my culture as a member of Congress. She said, I never felt like I needed that before, but then when I saw it, she said, I can't explain it. I just burst into tears, a flood of tears. And I just said, yeah, I understand that. Just because I've been with Marilyn and see the reaction that people had with her.
Yeah.
I admire so much of just like how like proud you are of your culture, of like both your cultures, going to an HBCU and then like wearing that hanbok. Like that's just so inspiring and incredible.
You know, and that was being sworn in Congress. That's the biggest stage I've ever been on in my whole life. And so I tell people sometimes you don't have to get everything perfect along the way, but you can make a decision that makes a huge impact.
And I hope that people, like kids, anyone,
Yeah.
can see that even being in Tacoma,
Right.
you know,
Right.
that there's still time and there's no like point where it's just too late.
No,
you know?
never.
Like you said just earlier in the podcast that there's a whole world.
Yeah.
So
There's a whole world.
there's so many things that you can do, so many new people that you can meet.
Right.
And moving on to the last question.
Okay.
There are people listening to this podcast that dream of changing the world, including myself.
Yeah.
And maybe it's getting into education, maybe it's getting into government, maybe it's figuring out a way to provide a clean drinking water to every human on the planet. What advice would you give to those people that want to commit their lives to breaking down barriers for others? Congresswoman Strickland, Marilyn, let's start with you.
So I would say two things. When you're what I call a trailblazer or the first, you have a duty to make sure that you're never the last. And so I was the first black woman to be mayor of Tacoma. I'm the first black member of the Washington State Congressional Delegation. And so, you know, as I leave these positions, and I'm not going anywhere soon in Congress, but you want to make sure that you're bringing people up behind you and around you so that you can have a successor who may look like you, right? And I think that's very important. And of course, they will always be qualified. But I would also say, too, that so much about trying to make big changes in the world is about consistency. Because anything you want to do that is going to be life-changing or changing the world is going to be hard.
Right.
And every time you try anything hard, what happens? People tell you it can't be done.
Right.
They will trash talk you. They will find a
Right.
million reasons to say no to you. And you have to be consistent. And I'd say that's just kind of a life rule in general.
Right.
Consistency, long term, always wins over short term intensity. So just stay consistent, stay focused on the prize, and understand that when you try to do big things, you're always going to have haters.
Yeah.
I love that.
And Pat.
Yeah, a couple things that I would add is in terms of breaking down barriers for others, you kind of have to know what your skill set is, what your interests are, because when you're breaking down barriers, it's hard work.
Yeah.
And I'm not breaking down barriers in the way that my wife is. I'm facilitating the breaking of barriers with others. And you have to know where your passion lies. And part of the way to do that is, number one, I think it's important to travel. And I didn't do this. She did. She studied abroad when she was in college. But I've had a fair amount of travel in my life. And when you travel, you start to see the world as it really is, as opposed to the way you assume it is. And it gives you ideas or opportunities to do some really remarkable things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I would also add that you need to say yes to things. There are plenty of opportunities out there that a lot of people say no to. And I had a really good mentor when I started teaching. And I was asked to go teach in Nigeria. And it didn't happen because we had 2 dogs at the time, and that was not going to go over well with my daughters because the dogs couldn't come with us. Then I was asked to go to another school to teach, and I said no to that. And my mentor said to me, he said, "Hey, you said no to this, and you said no to that." And I said, "Yeah." And I explained why, and he said, "No, that's okay." But he said, what you have to understand is if you keep saying no, people are going to stop asking.
Right.
Yes.
So you really want to make sure that if there's an opportunity there and there's a match, that you take it. And I ended up being a principal because they asked me to take a different job. And I said, yeah. I didn't really want to leave teaching, but I said, yeah. And that led me to where I am now. So just say yes.
Just say yes.
Just do it.
Well, I just want to say personally, just like, thank you so much. I mean, just being here and listening, like, this definitely just changed.
Definitely.
And I feel very moved, and, like, it's not a lot, but, I mean, maybe it's not a lot to you guys, but it's a lot to us, a lot to me.
Right.
And, Marilyn and Pat, thank you so much for coming to the studio to spend time with us today. And remember, your future isn't found, it's forged. Keep pushing, keep growing, and keep defining your destiny. Until next time.
It's your host, Elliot.
And Lily,
Signing off. Let's switch gears a bit, Marilyn. When you were mayor of Tacoma, you had this brilliant idea of partnering with the school district to provide paid work experiences for teens to prepare us for the real world. In fact, this podcast is a Jobs 253
Oh, you had it.
No, the best part was Marilyn. That was the best part of that whole thing.
Like you're in trouble.
That's okay. I was good.